Hello friends, today I'm going to answer the question, how does a land contract work? So how does a land contract work? Well, by the end of this video, you'll have a thorough understanding of exactly how land contracts work. Equipping you with the knowledge to enter into one is either a buyer or a seller. So what are the intricacies of a land contract that make them an appealing alternative to a traditional mortgage? How can both buyers and sellers benefit from this arrangement? And what are the potential pitfalls that both should look out for? Those are great questions and ones I'll answer in this video as we dive into this topic, but I first want to explain the mechanics of a land contract. Secondly, I'll explain why and when are the best time to utilize a land contract. And finally, I'm going to offer up pros and cons of utilizing a land contract. If you're ready, let's go. So first off, I think it's important to understand what a land contract is. A land contract is an agreement that allows somebody to come in and buy a home from a seller financing model, meaning that a seller can sell to a buyer through a land contract that has a lot of different benefits to it than a traditional mortgage. And I'll explain those as we go through the components. So the first component, and these are all negotiated between the buyer and the seller, but it's the purchase price of the home, which is pretty standard. There's going to be an interest rate that are paid out, and traditionally, because the buyer coming in can't get traditional financing, that interest rate can be negotiated a little bit higher if you are the seller. The down payment amount. Once again, the reason somebody might be utilizing a land contract is because they might not have enough money saved up to have a down payment or closing cost, but that is also a negotiating piece and a component of land contracts. The next one is what periodic payment or cadence do you want payments to come in at? Most people prefer monthly, and that's what I'd highly recommend. The other thing that would be negotiated in a land contract is if there is a balloon payment. A balloon payment is when the total amount due is due at a certain date in the future. Let's say that you enter into a land contract and somebody's paying you a small payment every month. Everything's been negotiated, but 5 years from now, there's a balloon payment, which means within 5 years, they have to get traditional financing or pay off the whole amount of the loan. That's not uncommon in land contracts, but doesn't have to be included. Obviously, the loan term, how long is the loan for? Traditionally, getting people into a home, you're looking at a 30-year mortgage, and that's something else that's left up to be negotiated on, but 30-year term works well in the strategies that I've used, and I'll explain why here in a minute. The other component is equitable title. Now, what does that mean? Now, that's for the buyer, and it prevents the seller from reselling to a third party or taking out liens on the property. If they were in a pinch and needed some money, equitable title will not allow them to go out and get a loan against the property. Also involved in that is who's responsible for taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities. And obviously the person on the buying end of that land contract is almost 99% of the time responsible for all of that. Also negotiated in it, another component is a default clause. What happens if the buyer stops making payments? And this is one of the interesting things about a land contract is unlike a traditional mortgage, if somebody stopped making payments, a lot of times the bank will allow them 30, 60, 90, 120 days to correct that or work with them. In a land contract, if you're the seller and the buyer stops making payment, you can evict the buyer from the house without going through a foreclosure process. This is why for a seller, a land contract is a game changer. And the final component is a requirement to record the land contract with the appropriate government entities. So why and when should a land contract be used? So the why behind it is typically if you have somebody that wants to buy a home, but they don't have enough history to get a traditional mortgage, or they don't have the funds, or maybe they've had bad credit in the past, they've been hurt by a short sale or foreclosure, so they can't even get a loan. This allows them the opportunity to purchase a home by utilizing a land contract. And when should you utilize a land contract? Well, a strategy that I love utilizing for land contracts is something called a slow flip. And this is exactly how a slow flip works. You go out and you find a cheaper piece of property. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm looking in the Midwest and I'm trying to find homes between $40,000 and $70,000. I'm making very low offers on these homes, and the chances of one getting accepted is probably 1 out of 15. But once that's accepted, let's say it was a $70,000 home that I got for $50,000. I'll go to my private money source and I'll borrow that money. And typically it's between 8 to 12%. I try and get it on the low end, but let's say it falls on 10%. But I'm looking to have that amortized out over a 5, 6, or 7-year period of time. So the money I borrowed from the hard money lender, I want that paid back as if it were a car loan, right? So that $50,000, I'm pretending like it was a car loan that is going to be paid back in 5 to 7 years to them. Now, I will then sell this same property that I just bought with cash from my private money lender's funds, and I'm going to sell it to somebody for $70,000. But I become the bank utilizing a land contract, and I amortize it out over a 30-year period of time. Now, because they can't get traditional lending, I mark the interest rate up. And so I'm trying to get the money that I pay to the private money lender every single month that'll be paid off in 5, 6, 7 years, for that to be lower than the mortgage payment I'm getting from the buyer through a land contract. And if I can have this higher than that, and that's why I'll play with the 5, 6, 7, 8 years, because this has to pay for this. Because once that's paid off, what happens? I do not owe any money, but I've got to amortize out over a 30-year loan. And at that point, I'm making that money every single month. So let's say that the payment to my private money lender was $925, but the payment coming into me was $975, which still might be cheaper than them renting the home, but they own it. And so I have $975 coming in. Now remember, they're responsible for everything: taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities. So that $975 comes in, I pay $925 out every single month. Now you're saying $50 isn't a ton of money, but that's why it's a slow burn or a slow flip. It's not money coming in every single month that's gonna make you rich. But when you're 5 or 6 or 7 hits, every month beyond that, you're making that full $975. And if that person were to ever sell it or wanna sell it, or if there's a balloon in there, then you get that $70,000 coming into your pocket. But let's say that you didn't have just one of these, but let's say that you had 20, 30, 50 of these. If you had 30 of these scenarios, let's say where you're bringing in after year 6 or 7, $1,000 a month, and you had 30 of them, that's $30,000 a month coming in. That's a pretty good real estate empire to start building utilizing this strategy. So that's the strategy that I love for land contracts. So what are some of the pros and cons for both the buyers and the sellers? Well, some of the pros for the buyer is you can get into a home with little to no money down, no credit. It's a great way to get in a home if you're in a financial distress. You can also get into it with no down payment or very little down payment or almost no closing costs. And just like a traditional mortgage, because of land contract, you get to utilize the home. It is your home, and you get to enjoy the use of the property as your home, while at the same time making payments to the seller. So what are the negative impacts for you, the buyer, if you're entered into a land contract? Well, number one, you don't build up equity with your payments. It might not improve your credit because the seller isn't going to report your payments to the credit bureaus. Another negative is the buyer. If you can't make payments or stop making payments, you could be evicted, and all the money you pay towards that property could be all lost. So what are the pros for the seller? For one, a seller can charge more than the bank as far as interest rate and monthly payment because this person can't get a traditional loan. And probably the biggest pro is if the buyer does default on making payments, you don't have to go through the foreclosure process. You can evict them as if you were the landlord without any of the landlord responsibilities. That is the number one biggest reason for a land contract if you are a seller. So what are the risks for a seller? Well, number one, you take the risk of the buyer defaulting on maybe tax payments, right? If they don't make the tax payments, that's going to fall back on the property, which you would have to remedy or fix. And obviously another risk is you could end up with a buyer who doesn't make payments. They could damage the property, but still, this is so much easier than a traditional mortgage or traditional seller financing options because you do not have the landlord responsibilities, but you can treat them as a landlord and evict them. So land contracts are definitely more beneficial for the seller than they are the buyer. But I'd be interested in your feedback. What have you seen? How have you utilized land contracts? Comment below. Let's engage in a dialogue. And as always, just for coming by and watching the video, I've got a free gift for you. Just click on the link below, aaronsfreetraining.com. It's a short-term rental calculator. You put in the purchase price, the income, the expenses, and it does all the work. It spits out to you whether it's a good deal or not, and it's 100% free, no obligation. Once again, I appreciate you stopping by. Have an amazing day.